Cost is a central element in the implementation category. Figuring out what it costs to manufacture a product, or if the product hasn't yet been made, what it might cost to manufacture it, can get very complex, and the corresponding research can take a lot of time. Here we're going to look at a product component and try to figure out what it might cost to manufacture it. In this example and exercise, we will try to estimate the cost for injection molding for one of our disposable fountain pen components, the barrel. And then depending on your particular case, such as the barrel of a fountain pen, you can adapt these cost components to fit the specifics of a particular manufacturing process. Before we get into the specifics of cost, we need to think about what kind of cost components to consider. We can't teach an entire course on managerial cost accounting in this one example, so I'm just going to show you some of the general ways of how cost components are typically split up. So generally, cost components in the manufacturing process can be thought of in two categories: direct manufacturing costs and indirect manufacturing costs, or overhead. Direct manufacturing costs include direct material, such as the raw material that is actually incorporated into the finished product, and direct labor costs, which are the costs of salaries and wages and fringe benefits for people who work directly on the manufactured products. Overhead includes indirect costs, such as material that's used in the manufacturing process but doesn't actually become a part of the finished product. Also, indirect labor is part of overhead. That's the cost of people who don't work directly on the product per se, but whose services are necessary for the manufacturing process to occur. Then there are other manufacturing costs, including depreciation of equipment, property taxes, utilities, and other costs which are necessary for the manufacturing processes to occur. So, as we said before, researching into the components of costs can get very complex, and the research can take a lot of time. So it's really important to be clear about why we want to know certain costs at any particular moment in the innovation process, so we can determine for our cost estimates the extent, accuracy, and reliability of the estimate that we need. We don't want to waste time or money at any point in the innovation process if we can help it. At the beginning of the innovation process, when uncertainty is very high and things are kind of fuzzy, we want to know quickly, without spending too much time or effort, whether some particular costs are in principle extremely prohibitive. But we don't need to get exact figures to know that. We really only need a rough estimate on the scale of an order of magnitude. So for example, if we find out that a particular cost is $1,000 versus $100,000, we don't need to know exactly what that costs to know whether or not something is going to be prohibitive. On the other hand, sometimes costs can be so insignificant in principle that it really doesn't make a lot of sense to spend time and money figuring out those particular costs with any great deal of accuracy. Even if we know how to do it, we don't want to waste time on it. And other times, there may not be any specific individual cost to focus on, but the complexity of the manufacturing process itself might be the dominant cost component that we need to really focus on. Then there are other cases where accuracy and reliability of cost data can be critical. For example, when you have an innovative idea which involves a large volume of products, but which you expect very thin profit margins, you're going to need to know with a high degree of accuracy and certainty what those costs are. When researching costs, there's also a couple of principles that you should consider. Really want you to think about accuracy and reliability of what you're finding. Accuracy is, what's the range of costs that you're finding around a particular average. Sometimes you can find highly accurate ranges of cost, and sometimes accuracy is low. Reliability means how much confidence you have in the numbers that you're finding. So reliability relates directly to the trustworthiness of the source from where you're getting your data. And then another component to consider is effort. Think about how much effort it's going to take in order to get the data and whether it's worth the effort. You really want to search intelligently. Okay? You want to be thinking through this process, questioning what you see. When you select sources, you want to consider the accuracy of the source, the reliability, and the effort that's involved. And realize that you may have to make some trade-offs. You may be able to get very accurate numbers, but the amount of effort may be too high at that particular point in the innovation process. Or you might find some very reliable data, but it may not be at the as accurate or at the level of detail that you needed. So you have to think, what am I looking at? Is this really useful, and is it worth the effort required? So here are some examples of what I'm talking about regarding accuracy and reliability of cost information, depending on the source that you use to get that information. Making calls directly to industry is often the best source. For instance, getting price quotations from raw material suppliers. Now keep in mind, when you're calling suppliers, there's a difference between list prices and negotiated prices, and these can vary greatly. But you can increase your accuracy and reliability by getting price quotes from more than one supplier and calculating an average. Sometimes you'll need to cost a material or component that isn't sold presently on the market today. If that's the case, you're going to need to talk to industry experts or somebody with manufacturing knowledge of the industry in question. Other authoritative, or at least semi-authoritative, sources of cost information include government agencies, industry associations, and individual companies. Government statistics can be very reliable and accurate because significant effort goes into surveying this data systematically, and the government agencies that produce this data usually describe the methods that they used in detail, so you can examine the accuracy and reliability for your own purposes. For instance, wage data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics is a very accurate source for labor costs. However, sometimes government agencies lack the granularity that we need to apply them to our particular cost estimates. Industry associations, on the other hand, often do have more granular data about an industry. However, the data collected by industry associations may or may not be conducted with the same thoroughness as a government source. Individual companies also publish some cost data, particularly public companies that publish their financials. They're required to publish their cost of goods sold in an income statement. And so you can rely on this information because the companies are required, because they're publicly traded, to publish accurate financials under penalty of law. However, most private companies aren't required to publish accurate data, so you have to consider whether there's bias or intentional misdirection in some company materials. So if you're looking at company annual reports, websites, and brochures, use a critical eye and consider the company and whether or not they're required to accurately report any numbers that you're finding. Academic and trade literature, books, journal articles, technical reports, things like that, are typically very accurate and reliable and can be great for understanding the science and engineering behind manufacturing processes that we're trying to cost. But such publications rarely contain actual cost estimates, but some do. Look for books and articles written by people who actually work or have worked in a particular industry. You can also look for books, particularly in university libraries, that begin with the title Handbook of something, and these usually have many chapters written by different authors who are experts in those particular fields or subjects. You can also find useful documents published on university websites, for instance, for engineering courses, or maybe project reports for different university departments that are published on their websites. These can contain background information about manufacturing processes and sometimes cost information. Then also, there's just general information that you can find on the web, that you can find through a Google search. Just be very careful and critical here. It's usually okay to get some background information from general web searches, especially like finding out what terminology is used for specific manufacturing processes, and to get an idea of some of the companies and experts in a particular industry or on a particular process. But just be very careful and critical before proceeding from here. And always consider the source of any information that you find on the web. Okay, back to our example of trying to determine the cost for a pen barrel. What I would like you to do now is to please read the Wikipedia article on the injection molding process, and I'd just like you to get a basic understanding of the injection molding process and to learn terms and concepts that we will use later in our search for information on cost.